Howdy, folks. It's Robey with the Manufactured Mind. Hope everybody's doing well today. Before I get started, I've got a favor to ask everybody. If you don't mind, would you please go and follow the podcast on Podbean? Subscribe to the YouTube channel, The Manufactured Mind. It would be greatly appreciated. I'm on Spotify as well, but not all of my episodes are on Spotify. All of them are on Podbean, and as of now, everyone that is posted to Podbean is posted to YouTube as well. So, I would very much appreciate your support. Having said, let's dive right in. Today's episode is the weight of our choices, how decisions compound, why accountability liberates, and what recovery teaches us about agency. I want you to think about where you're at right now. Not philosophically, but concretely. Your apartment, your car, wherever you're listening, your financial situation, your relationships, your health, your state of mind when you wake up in the morning. And then I want to ask you, how did you get here to this point that you're at right now? Because the instinctive answer for most people, especially people in recovery, especially people who've been through trauma, is to reach for external explanations first. Like bad parents, bad luck, a system that failed you, a neighborhood, a diagnosis, etc. So an honest admission here was my downfall into addiction. It was easy for me to, because see, it started out by me making the choice to accept the doctor's offer to give me pain medication. And I could sit here and say, well, it was because I was in so much pain, and yes, that was the case, but it is still a choice. I was given a choice. The doctor said, I can prescribe you this Vicodin, or you can continue to go at it the way you're going at it, which is just attempting to fight it naturally with nothing. And I was desperate. I wanted to stay in the Marine Corps. And I'm not making excuses here. I'm just giving context as to why I made the choice that I made. But at the end of the day, I still made a choice, and it was the wrong choice. Because some of these external explanations, that we have are real. Trauma is real. Systemic failure is real. Neurological predisposition is real. But, and here's the uncomfortable part. Somewhere in the chain, there were choice points, like I just explained with my personal experience. Moments where a different decision was possible, even if it was hard, even if the deck was stacked. And the accumulation of those moments is a significant part of why you ended up where you ended up. It's a significant part of why I ended up where I ended up. And, this is not a lecture on personal responsibility from someone who's figured it all out, folks. Not at all. It's not toxic positivity. It's not, quote, just make better choices. It's an honest examination of something that most people in recovery eventually have to face, which is the relationship between your choices and your circumstances, and the liberating realization that if choice played a role in building the life you didn't want, then choice can play a role in building the life that you do want. The moment you accept that your choices matter is the moment that you stop being a passenger in your own life And let that sink in. So we have the compound effect of decisions, okay? And as a metaphoric example, there's the financial metaphor. In finance, compound interest works because each return generates its own returns. A dollar invested today isn't worth a dollar. It's worth what that dollar becomes over decades of compounding. Decisions work the same way, except the interest rate can be positive or negative. For instance, the first time you used a substance to cope with something instead of sitting with it, that single decision didn't just affect that day. It established a coping pattern. That pattern made it easier to reach for substances the next time, which made it easier the time after that. Each repetition strengthened the neural pathway, weakened alternative pathways, and shifted your social circle toward people who reinforced the behavior. And then 5 years later, you're not dealing with one bad choice, you're dealing with thousands of compounded ones. And so there's some neuroscience behind this. Hebb's principle. Neurons that fire together wire together. I'm sure many of you have heard that. So every time you make a choice, you're not just doing something, you're strengthening the neural architecture that makes that choice more automatic next time. This is the mechanism behind habit formation, and it's morally neutral. It works the same way for destructive habits and constructive ones. And it starts, the prefrontal cortex in the brain is, this is the part of the brain responsible for execution function, or executive function, I'm sorry. Like weighing consequences, inhibiting impulses, planning for the future. In addition, this region of the brain gets progressively hijacked. The more you choose short-term relief, the weaker your long-term planning becomes. It's not metaphorical. There's measurable reduction in prefrontal activity in people with substance use disorders. Your choices are literally reshaping the hardware that makes future choices. But here's the flip side, and this is very critical, folks. Neuroplasticity works in both directions. The same mechanism that allowed addiction to rewire your brain is the mechanism that allows recovery to rewire it back. Every time you choose differently in recovery, every meditation session, every time you sit with discomfort instead of numbing it, every honest conversation, you're rebuilding the neural infrastructure for better decisions. This isn't feel-good talk, it's measurable biology. And so there's some invisible decisions. This is a concept most people miss. And it's worth spending some real time on. The choices that compound most powerfully are usually the ones we don't think of as choices. Like who you spend time with, what you consume, information, food, media, etc. What time you go to sleep, whether you pick up the phone when someone who drains you calls, whether you sit in silence for 10 minutes in the morning or immediately reach for stimulation, like your phone. I wake up between 4 and 5 a.m. I meditate. That's a choice I make every single day. And it's been compounding for over a year now, like a year and a half. And the person I am today is meaningfully different from who I'd be if I'd spent that same hour scrolling through my phone. Not because one meditation session is life-changing, but because 400 plus meditation sessions compounded into a fundamentally different relationship with my own mind. And now flip that. In active addiction, the invisible decisions were compounding in the other direction. Choosing to hang around certain people. Choosing to avoid the phone call to someone who would hold me accountable. choosing to lie about where you were. None of those felt like major crossroads in the moment. They felt like nothing. And that's exactly why they were so dangerous. And the most dangerous decisions are the ones you don't realize you're making. The most powerful ones are too. And then you have the seduction of the victim narrative. You know, why does it feel good to be the victim? Well, the victim narrative is seductive because it works. It removes the crushing weight of responsibility. If everything that happened to you was done to you, then you're absolved. You're innocent. You don't have to look in the mirror and reckon with your role and your own destruction. And for someone in the depths of addiction or early recovery, that's an incredibly appealing story. Because the alternative, owning your part, feels like it might kill you. So I'm going to be honest with you for a second. You know, I was living in this mindset, this victim narrative, for quite some time. Some specific ways that it showed up was, for like I said earlier, I got put on pain medication. Well, at the end of the day, that was a choice, but that was something that I, would say, or oh, it's because I got hurt in the Marine Corps, which is true, but I still made the choice to accept the doctor's offer for opiates. At one point, I was blaming things that happened in my childhood, a relationship with a family member, like my father. There's much distance there, unfortunately, and I found myself blaming him for a lot of things at first and not owning up to anything myself. I found myself blaming a lot of people, actually. And by doing so, I was seemingly protecting myself from owning my own choices, taking accountability. And I don't really know if that's protecting myself from it. It's more like preventing myself from it, from, self-accountability. And so the cost of the story is the victim narrative has a price. And the price is your agency. If nothing is your fault, then nothing is your power. If your circumstances were entirely imposed on you, then you have no ability to change them. The story that protects you from accountability also traps you in helplessness. So think about this from a purely logical standpoint, okay? If you are a complete victim of circumstance, then recovery is absolutely impossible because recovery requires agency. It requires you to make different choices. The very act of getting clean contradicts the narrative that you have no power over your situation. So at some point, every person in recovery has to abandon the victim story. Not because it's entirely false, but because it's incompatible with getting better. And that's a very distinct feature there. So the answer isn't victim or accountable. It's both. You can simultaneously hold two truths. Truth one, real things happen to you that you didn't choose and didn't deserve. Like trauma, genetic predisposition, environmental factors, systemic failures. These are real, they're documented, and dismissing them is dishonest. And then truth two, within and around those circumstances, you made choices. Some of them make things worse. Some of them were the best you could do at the time, but they were still choices. And acknowledging them doesn't diminish the reality of truth one. Not at all. The mature position, the position that actually enables change, is holding both of these truths simultaneously. It wasn't your fault that you grew up in chaos. It is your responsibility to decide what you do with the rest of your life. Those aren't contradictory statements, they're complementary ones. And so let me bring some philosophical interest into this for a second. I don't know if any of you are familiar with the Bhagavad Gita, which is a Hindu text, but it has something to say about this. The idea that you're responsible for your actions, but not entitled to the fruit of those actions. Krishna isn't telling Arjuna, which by the way is the same person. The Bhagavad Gita is a story of the war within oneself, with oneself. So Krishna and Arjuna are the same person. So Krishna isn't telling Arjuna the circumstances don't matter. He's telling him that regardless of circumstances, you have a duty to act. Your dharma exists independent of what was done to you. That's a version of this, or there's a version of this in Stoic philosophy too. The dichotomy of control. You can't control what happens to you. You can control what you do about it. But the key insight is that the quote, what you do about it part is where your entire life gets built. So you're not responsible for the fire, you're responsible for whether you sit in the ashes or start building again, if that makes sense. So where does choice actually live? Before I go any farther with the accountability message, I need to address the elephant in the room. Addiction genuinely impairs the machinery of choice. This isn't an excuse. It's biology. And if you don't acknowledge it, you'll come across as someone who doesn't understand the thing they're talking about. So here's what research shows. Chronic substance use fundamentally alters the brain's reward circuitry. The ventral tegmental area floods the nucleus accumbens with dopamine in response to substances, and over time the brain downregulates its natural dopamine production and receptor density. The result is that the addicted brain experiences normal life as flat, gray, and unrewarding, and the substance as the only reliable source of feeling okay. And telling someone in that state to just choose differently is like telling someone with a broken leg to just walk. The hardware is completely compromised. Um, so for me, decision making during addiction, it felt damn near impossible. Like, I felt stuck. Like, it got to the point where, like, I didn't want to do drugs, but I just kept doing them. Like, it was like a natural reaction almost. Like, or just a subconscious reaction. Like, I would automatically just go to it without thinking about it. And I felt stuck. But it got to the point where one day I was like, man, I was real with myself. I was like, dude, if you keep going at this rate, you're not gonna be here in 2 years. You're gonna be dead. Mind you, I've survived 6 overdoses. The first one, they had to use defibrillators to bring me back. The sixth one, they had to use 16 or 17 Narcans to bring me back. And the 4 in between, I just miraculously came out of it somehow with no intervention of any kind, which is a very rare occasion. That's not heard of very often at all. I felt like I didn't have options. But at the same time, I recognized that I did have options. But choosing the better option seemed so hard and scary. That's the big one. It scared the hell out of me. Because I had realized that I had fallen so far into addiction that every day I was waking up and wasting my entire day going out and seeking out a fucking high all day long, seeking out a substance all day long, and then not getting it all day long until later that night. And then right back to the same fucking cycle the next day. Chasing the fucking high. Wasting my fucking life. But, now in recovery, my perception of options is completely different. I see opportunity in everything now. I, I find the positive in the negative now. I see the beauty in life. You know, all about self-accountability. As I've said in this episode quite a few times now, I recognize that I had the choice to turn the doctor's offer down when he offered to prescribe me the opiates, but I chose yes. And that's on me. That's all completely on me. The options that I have now, I could go to a meeting, I can call someone, and I do. I act on those options. And those options were obviously there when I was in addiction too, but I didn't recognize them. I didn't want them. That was just it. I didn't want it. And then that just comes down to it, somebody's not going to help themselves until they want to help themselves, until they make the choice to help themselves. But the calling someone and going to a meeting thing, it just literally didn't register as viable options when my brain was hijacked by the drugs. So the margin where choice still exists. So here's the nuance that makes this conversation worth having. Even with impaired decision making, choice doesn't disappear entirely. It just narrows. It gets harder to access. But there are margins, moments of clarity, windows where the prefrontal cortex breaks through the noise of craving, and those margins are where the whole game is played. Think about the last moment of clarity before relapse. Almost everyone in recovery can describe it. That split second where you know exactly what you are about to do. You know it's going to make things worse, and there's a voice somewhere saying, don't do it. That moment is very real. Very, very real. It's neurologically real. It's the prefrontal cortex making its last stand before the limbic system overrides it. And in that moment, there is a choice. It is an incredibly hard choice. The deck is stacked against making the right one, but it does exist. Recovery, in a lot of ways, folks, is about widening that margin. Every day you stay clean, the window of clarity gets a little bit bigger. The prefrontal cortex gets a little bit stronger, and the automatic pull towards substance gets a little bit weaker. Your capacity for choice literally expands over time. So I'll give you a personal experience here. So, I've been on methadone taper for a year and a half. Now, I was at 150 milligrams down to 35 milligrams now. And mind you, I've been on methadone treatment this is the 6th year. And it's the 6th year because the first 3 years, the first 3 years, because I'm almost at 3 years of not using illicit substances. So the first 3 years or so, I was just using it as a crutch for when I didn't have my fix of drugs of choice. And then that day that I had that talk with myself, and I'm like, dude, you're gonna die. Plain and simple. And I had a choice to make. Did I want to make an attempt to resurrect myself, so to speak, out of addiction? Or did I just want to give into it and let it take its course? Well, I chose to resurrect myself out of addiction. And that's when the methadone taper started. And slowly but surely, I've gained more cognitive clarity. I've gained the ability to think long term again. My emotional range, I'm a little different in that aspect. Not to give any excuses or anything, but I'm ADHD, autism and ADHD, so I'm very hyper attuned to emotions. So my emotional range, I feel others' emotions very strongly, and that kind of played a part into the whole numbing by the drug addiction, because it's overwhelming for me. But I've learned that the fact that I do feel others' emotions very strongly, just as if they're my own, which that's clarity, and I've learned to sit with it rather than run from it. And that takes a lot for me to do, at least. But I'm doing it without illicit substances and while tapering down off of the methadone. So slowly but surely, the closer you get to ground zero, baseline, you will begin to gain more clarity. The brain is fascinating, folks. The body is fascinating. It heals itself in a deeply profound way if you feed it the right material. And when I say material, I mean food, decisions, choices, information, knowledge, etc. The the fact that I chose to go to, choosing MAT, medication assisted treatment. And yes, that's essentially replacing one drug with another, I know. But in my case, I replaced like 10 drugs with one. And that was a choice that has worked in my favor. And then I chose to taper. Another choice that has worked in my favor. I've chose to meditate every single day and do breath work every single day for over a year and a half now. Those are choices, and I've stuck by them. I choose to build my podcast about truth-telling. I'm choosing to record this podcast episode right now. It's all a choice. Those choices create conditions for better choices. It's not circular logic, it's a positive feedback loop. And it started with a single decision to do one thing differently. One thing. So recovery doesn't give you perfect choices, it gives you more of them. What you do with that is on you. And so then we have accountability and shame. Accountability versus shame, because they're not the same thing. So the distinction matters enormously, and most people conflate them. Shame says, I did bad things because I am bad. Accountability says, I made choices that caused harm, and I have the power to make different choices. Shame is backward-looking and identity-based. It defines who you are by what you did. Accountability is forward-looking and behavior-based. It separates what you did from what you're capable of becoming. And in recovery circles, people often resist accountability because they've confused it with shame. They think owning their choices means accepting that they're fundamentally broken. And since that narrative is paralyzing and painful, they avoid accountability altogether. But the whole point of accountability, folks, is that it's the exit from shame. If you can say, I've made choices that led here without it meaning I am inherently defective, you've found the door out. It's that simple, but yet often so hard. I find great liberation in self-accountability. And I think that, honestly, that started the day that I chose recovery. The day I chose recovery and started owning up to my truth, that I put myself in that position of self-destruction, it was absolutely liberating. It was freedom. It's an overwhelming sense of freedom when you're honest with yourself and others. I'm telling you, trust me on this. I know that it feels shameful, but it's not. In fact, I would argue that you would gain much more respect for yourself and from others if you hold yourself accountable. So a real practice that you can do, so a daily audit, so to speak. I would suggest that you start asking yourself one question at the end of each day. What decisions did I make today that are building the life that I want? And what decisions am I making that are working against it? And the point isn't to achieve a perfect score, folks. The point is awareness. Most people, even people deep in recovery, are making dozens of autopilot decisions every day that they've never examined. And this is something that we all do. Even people not in recovery or ever been in addiction. The autopilot decisions happen to everybody. So the daily audit makes the invisible visible. And once a decision is visible, you have power over it in a way that you did not before. And so what this looks like in my life is my 4 a.m. wake-up call is a choice. My meditation is a choice. What I eat, who I call, whether I work on the podcast or scroll on my damn phone, all choices. And I can trace a direct line from those daily choices to the trajectory of my recovery, my mental clarity, my sense of purpose. None of them are dramatic in isolation. All of them are transformative in accumulation. And so then you have micro decisions and the myth of the big moment. So people love the narrative of the single moment that changed everything, the rock bottom, the epiphany, the intervention. And those moments are very real, but they're not where recovery actually happens. Recovery happens in the 10,000 micro decisions that follow that big moment. The decision to go to bed instead of staying up. The decision to be honest when a lie would be so much easier. The decision to sit with anxiety instead of running from it. Something that I am still having trouble doing. But now, me running from anxiety is me going and zoning out into a video game or something. Because I have anxiety on a daily basis, and it's debilitating to me. Like, it gets to the point where I feel like I can't even walk outside of my home. It's pretty bad. So that's something I'm still working on combating. But the big moment gives you a new direction. The micro decisions are the steps you actually take in that direction. And most people who relapse don't fail at the big moments, they fail at the small ones. They stop meditating, they start isolating, they skip one meeting, then two, then all of them. The erosion happens at the level of the invisible decisions long before the visible collapse. Nobody relapses in a moment. They relapse in the 1,000 quiet choices that preceded the moment. So the liberating truth, folks, is if you built this, you can build something else. If your choices played a significant role in creating the life you're trying to leave behind, then your choices have the power to create a different life. That's not a platitude. It's the logical consequence of everything everything we've been talking about for the last 46 minutes here. The same compounding that worked against you can work for you. The same neuroplasticity that allowed addiction to reshape the brain is reshaping it right now in recovery, every single day. And the same person who made choices that led to destruction is making choices that are leading somewhere else. So you're not a different person, you're the same person making different choices. And that's more powerful than being a different person because it means you didn't need to be fixed. You needed to decide. And so what this is not, folks, this isn't, this isn't, quote, you can do anything if you just believe. Some damage is permanent. Some consequences are irreversible. Some circumstances are genuinely outside of your control. Accountability doesn't mean omnipotence. I'm sorry, omnipotence. It means agency within constraints. It means doing the most with what you have rather than mourning what you don't. And it doesn't mean doing it alone. One of the most important choices in recovery is the choice to ask for help, okay? That's not weakness. It's one of the highest exercises of agency there is. You're looking at your situation, recognizing you can't navigate it solo, and making the decision to bring in reinforcements. That's accountability in action. And so I could bring my military experience into this, from the Marine Corps. The Marine Corps didn't teach me to control outcomes. They taught me to control my response to situations that I can't control. That's the essence of what this episode is about. You can't choose your circumstances. You can't choose your genetics. You can't choose what happened to you as a child. But you can choose what you do next. And what you do next is the only thing that's ever actually changed anyone's life. The discipline I learned in the Marine Corps, the structure, the relentless forward motion, the refusal to quit, those aren't just military values, they're recovery values, they're human values. They're all rooted in the same fundamental truth. Your choices are your power. Nobody's coming to save you. That's not depressing. That's the best news you'll ever hear. Because it means you already have what you need, which is you. So I want to close by speaking directly to two groups of people because I'm sure that they're both listening at some point. So first, the person in active addiction. You need to talk to them like a human, Acknowledge that everything that I've just said might sound impossible from where they're sitting, and I do. And I acknowledge that the disease makes choices feel like an illusion. But I have to tell you this. Somewhere inside the chaos, there's still a moment, maybe just a flicker, where a different choice is possible. It might be as small as picking up the phone. It might be as small as telling one person the truth. But folks, that's enough. That's a starting point. One choice doesn't fix everything, but it starts the compound effect in the other direction. And so the second person, the person in recovery, I want to remind you that the choices that you're making right now, today, this week, are building something. You may not see the compound effect yet because they're inside or because you're inside it. But 6 months from now or a year from now, you'll look back and see a trajectory that was built one decision at a time. The meditation matters. The honesty matters. The discipline matters. Not because any single instance is transformative, but because all of them together are. So I want to leave you with a final thought. We are what we repeatedly choose, not what we intend, not what we wish, not what we plan, what we choose every day, starting now. This has been The Manufactured Mind, and I'm Robey. Choose wisely, folks. Peace out.